firstly, the question of blood fractions and whether that is or isn't covered by the prohibition for the receipt of blood transfusions.
That is correct as well, but if I could just mention, when blood transfusions were first introduced, there wasn't a lot of options with regard to blood fractions.
Yes, but my point is, or what I'm seeking to understand, is there was an interpretation at one point which said that members of the Jehovah's Witnesses should not receive blood fractions, but in more recent times it's been accepted, as I understand it, that there's no specific scriptural direction on that, so on blood fractions, that is, so that's a matter for the individual conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses.
That's right, and Mr. Stewart, if I may mention, this is an example of the desire of the governing body not to go beyond the scriptures. Clearly we have the direction in Acts chapter 15, 28 and 29 against blood. But if I could also mention, you see, as with anything in the community, more and more knowledge becomes available medically. It can be very overwhelming trying to see all the latest medical research and so on. But the governing body tries to make sure that they don't go beyond what is written. If we see that a direction from the scriptures has perhaps been used too broadly, then we're the first ones to try to correct that.
And I take it too that the state of knowledge about the scriptures, and in particular historical knowledge about scriptures, also improves or increases from time to time.
That is correct, but there are some basic things in the Bible that have not changed right from the beginnings of the Jehovah's Witness religion, and I won't take your time obviously going through those, but it is important to realize what are basic things in the Bible. For example, is the Bible from God? That there is no possibility of us changing our viewpoint on that.
Mr. Jackson, you probably know that we discussed with some of your members earlier in this hearing the relationship of the Bible being written at a time of particular political and social structure and its literal relevance in today's social and political context. Are you familiar with those discussions?
I am. I did hear your question, Your Honour, and I at the time was quite frustrated that I didn't have an opportunity to answer. So I appear this opportunity is now coming.
I'm going to give you an opportunity. Now, it is plain that over time, in relation to matters of relevance to this Commission, our understanding, both medical, social and of the political issues that arise, has changed, and you're aware of that?
I am aware of that, Your Honour.
Now, one of the characteristics that we have identified, and I've spoken about it and I'm sure you know this, that is manifest in the area of sexual abuse of children within institutions is the child's incapacity to tell an adult about what's been happening to them. You're familiar with that problem?
That is correct. I am familiar with that problem, yes.
I've described it by reference to the admonition that was certainly prevalent when I was a child, that children are to be seen but not heard. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
You familiar,
I do understand.
You're familiar with that concept?
Yes, yes.
Is it relevant to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Your Honour, in our publications, obviously I can't give you examples now, but we'd be very happy to do that. One of the key things we try to help parents to do is to encourage their children to communicate with them. As a missionary in the South Pacific, the cultures in the South Pacific definitely follow what Your Honour just said. If children are being disciplined or counselled, they're not supposed to speak at all. And over again, we encourage parents, no, children need to express themselves, they need to feel the love so that they can do that.
You've got the Bible there. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 3,
yes,
verse 4, there's a discussion of a man presiding over his household, having his children in subjection. Now, what does that mean?
That's a very good question, Your Honour. Biblically speaking, the word subjection infers respect and a willingness to comply with direction. It does not...
Your Bible then provides a reference back to Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4.
That is correct.
Which imposes the obligation on fathers to bring their children up in the discipline and admonition of Jehovah. What's the discipline of Jehovah?
So, Your Honour, the original language word there, discipline, it indicates a process of teaching, educating, making a disciple.
Well, from that reference in Ephesians, your Bible takes us back to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24.
Proverbs 13:24, yes.
And the exact quote is, whoever holds back his rod hates his son. What does that mean?
So, Your Honour, you'll notice there's an asterisk there on the term rod, and you see the footnote?
Yeah.
Discipline or punishment. So, in the application of this, the term rod is used as a symbol or a metaphor to indicate the authority to give some punishment. For example, in a modern day setting, my father could say to me, I don't go to the movies because I had broken some of the rules of the home.
So it's not about inflicting corporal punishment then?
It absolutely is not about inflicting corporal punishment.
It would have been when first written, wouldn't it?
How people applied it back then at that time, of course, is open to question.
Well, what you're telling me, as I understand it, is that your religion, your church, is prepared to interpret the Bible having regard to contemporary social attitudes and standards. Is that right?
Obviously, Your Honour, we need to take that into consideration, but the primary responsibility we have is to think, what does Jehovah God mean by this? And we look at other scriptures. One of the problems that many folk have when they read the Bible is they take one verse and they assume it means something out of context or not in reference to other scriptures. So for our understanding, Jehovah has said that children should be raised in a loving environment. Jesus was raised in such an environment.
Well, I've taken you to the way your own church constructs the biblical references, which, as we've noticed, takes us back to Proverbs. Correct?
That is correct.
But what you've given us is the understanding which your church now has about how that's to apply in contemporary society. Is that right?
That's a good question. Obviously, I can only speak about what we understand this to mean now, but I would argue the case that even back in ancient times, God did not have in mind for children to be beaten up in a bad way.
Does your church accept corporal punishment of children?
Our church accepts the family arrangement and expects that parents have the responsibility to discipline and raise their children.
That doesn't answer my question. Do you accept
I
corporal
see.
punishment?
In our literature, I think you'll see time and time again, we've endeavoured to explain that here, discipline is referring to more a mental point of view.
I regret to tell you, you're still not answering my question.
Sorry.
Do you accept
Okay.
corporal punishment?
No.
You don't?
Not personally, no. And not as an organisation. We don't encourage it.
But do you prohibit it?
Our literature has pointed out that the true way to discipline children is by educating them, not giving corporal punishment. Your Honour, I can only tell you the spirit behind our writings.
Now, I'm sure you know that one of the problems for survivors revealed by their evidence in this very hearing is their concern about having to approach men within the church to tell their story and then have that story assessed and judged by men alone. Do you understand?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Now, in the society in which you live and which I live, we have seen significant change, although perhaps not yet complete, in the role which women play in the decision-making and government of our society, haven't we?
We certainly have.
Yeah. And that's a reflection of a contemporary understanding of the role and contribution which everyone in our society can make to the common good, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, and I'm sure you know of the concerns expressed by the women who have given evidence in this hearing about the confrontation and difficulty in that confrontation which they found in approaching a male dominant structure. You understand that?
I do understand that, Your Honour.
Is there room for the church to change that?
That's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it. Is there a chance to make elders women or make women elders? No. There is no leeway there. But, Your Honour, if I could just mention...
Why is that? Can you tell me why that is?
Sure, yes. If we turn to first...
Is it because of a literal application of the Bible?
Your Honour, it goes back to the theme of the Scriptures right from the creation of Adam, right through Israelite times to the Christian era. But in all fairness, may I just say something with regard to that?
Oh, certainly.
You see, the role of women in the Jehovah's Witness religion is a very dignified role. We don't make women, well, we certainly do not want women to feel like second-rate citizens. In God's view, men and women are equal. But even people who fly aeroplanes realize you can't fly an aeroplane by committee. There has to be a pilot and a co-pilot. And that's the Bible arrangement, not because of any lack of intelligence or lack of ability on the part of women. It is an arrangement that has stood the test of time. Now, within that arrangement, the Bible clearly states that a man does not have absolute authority over a woman, and a woman is a co-worker, a complement, the Bible refers to as that. So I think in the context of understanding how women are treated among Jehovah's Witnesses, I think if you investigated further, you would see there are very many happy women in the marital arrangement.
It used to be the case that all of our women were, all of our pilots were women, wasn't it? We've changed that.
All of our pilots were, did we?
Were men.
All men? Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, but we're men, yes.
Yeah, we're men, and we've changed that now, and we have women who are pilots. Why couldn't the church accept that women can contribute to the decision-making processes, particularly in relation to allegations of sexual abuse brought forward by women?
The answer, Your Honour, is that we expect women to be involved in that. But in the actual role as elders within the Christian congregation, there is a very firm standard set there. There is no leeway whatsoever for that in the belief of Jehovah's Witnesses. But if I could mention, some of the reports that you've considered are from 25 years ago. And if I understand correctly from what little I heard of the Commission in the last few days, Mr. Spinks very accurately described that there has been more an awareness of Jehovah's Witnesses to make sure that any victim who has been a victim of a horrible crime does not be required to actually go before three men. We've made changes, Your Honour, because those changes in the actual technicalities of the policies don't change. They're not affected by the actual Bible principles, except the very important principle of showing love, empathy and concern, and trying to avoid any form of trauma. And that's our desire. If it wasn't perfect before, which it wasn't, we've tried to change that. And we will make further changes when we consider the recommendations of the Commission.
Well, we'll come back to your processes later on. I'll leave you now with Mr. Stewart.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Just on the last point, Mr. Jackson, with regard to a survivor of sexual abuse having to make the allegation directly to the accuser, do you agree that in those circumstances, should a survivor have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
I agree that it would be better for them not to do that unless the victim wants to do that.
Yes, well, that's why I phrased my question in the way that I did, and so I'll repeat it, that do you agree that in those circumstances the survivor should have to make the allegation in the presence of the accused?
Sorry, I don't understand your question. Could you rephrase it?
Do you agree that there are no circumstances in which the survivor of a sexual assault should have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses of having assaulted her?
I agree that that is the case.
And as I understand you're saying on your understanding that that's not required by your rules. In other words, your rules do not require the survivor of a sexual assault to have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her.
If I understand your question correctly, from what I've heard from Mr. Spink's testimony, that is not something that we require now. I'm prefacing this in the fact that it's not my field that I work with every day. Mr. Spinks and those who work in the service department work with these matters, but that is my understanding.
Yes. And so do you accept then that that should be made clear in your documents, manuals and instructions? In other words, that it should be made clear that a survivor of a sexual assault should not have to make her allegation in the presence of the person whom she accuses as having assaulted her?
Absolutely.
Now, Mr. Jackson, can a branch committee publish its own manuals and guidelines in respect of judicial committee procedures for responding to allegations of child sexual abuse?
I would think it would be unusual for that to happen. Seeing it's not my field per se, I couldn't give an inclusive answer with regard to that, but as far as the general principle goes, I would expect that they would get back to the service committee on it.
Well, what we see in the documents that we have that govern this issue currently is that they are documents which originate under the auspices of or with the approval of the governing body. So I'm referring to... Yeah, sorry, Mr. Jackson.
Sorry, my apologies.
So I'm referring to organize to do Jehovah's will, shepherd the flock of God, and the guidelines that are published to the branch committees.
Thank you. It's a rather long question, but if I've understood it correctly, we would expect the general framework of what we do to be published as approved by the governing body. But you see, when we say published, letters are published by the local branches that indicate any variance that may need to take place with regard to those policies. So that's why I was just hesitant to say that it's all-inclusive.
Well, if the Australia branch, for example, was to decide that the investigative step which precedes the appointment of a judicial committee need not be done by 2 elders, but can in Australia be done by